Listen to the words of the risen Christ. Peace be with you. Come and see his hands and the wound in his side. Peace be with you.
Hello and welcome to day 3 of this week of reflections. And we're looking at the events of Holy Week in something we're calling the Road to Easter. Many of the toys, games and films that I enjoyed as a child involved some form of violence. I grew up on a steady diet of 1980s action movies and TV series. And I'm not just talking about the relatively tame James Bond films or the rather comic and improbable adventures of the A-Team, in which thugs and hoodlums would routinely encounter grenades and gunfire, only to walk away a bit groggy. No, in my junior school years, I was watching RoboCop, Rambo, and anything with Schwarzenegger. Such was the popularity of these films amongst my age group that toys based on these action heroes were manufactured and marketed to kids, accessorised with arsenals of heavy weaponry. I'm not sure why the violent action movie genre appealed to me, or how so many of my 10-year-old friends got access to these films, but one thing I quickly worked out when watching them is that vengeance would be wrought, and the villain of the piece would reach a gruesome and emphatic end. Perhaps that is part of the appeal of these movies. There is a kind of justice. The bad guys get what they deserve. As it does for most children, the question of how I should have dealt with the real-life bad guys and bullies in school came up for me from time to time. The advice I had on this from friends and family tended to fall into one of 4 categories. Number 1, tell the teacher. Number 2, ignore them. Number 3, if they hit you, you hit them back. And 4, if they hit you, you hit them back harder. At no point did anybody suggest to me that I should buy them a Mars bar or invite them round for a game of Monopoly. According to chapter 6 of Luke's Gospel, Jesus says this: "But to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you." From the Gospels, it would seem that Jesus lived what he taught, and this is evidenced in the Garden of Gethsemane. Despite Peter's understandable anger at the injustice and a desire to bring out the sword, he is rebuked by Jesus, who informs him that those who live by violence tend to die the same way. I see anger at injustice as an entirely appropriate response to it. I think we see this anger portrayed in Jesus' turning of the moneylenders' tables at the beginning of the events of Passion Week. I also think it is entirely possible to follow the statement of the Apostle Paul to the church in Ephesus, where he writes, "Be angry and do not sin." There is currently much in our newspapers and upon our screens that could easily, and perhaps should, provoke anger. A question we should have is, what do we do with that anger? Remarkably, in the Garden of Gethsemane, we see not only a refusal by Jesus to react with force to the swords and clubs of the temple guards, but we also see a next level kind of grace as he healed one of the temple guards sent to arrest him. It seems to me that in the four Gospels, sometimes what Jesus says and does seems unreasonable and unfair. And it is certainly hard to put this kind of kindness for our enemies into practice. Jesus brought healing to one who would bring him harm. But perhaps, in some regards, many of us have responded in a similar way. If you are a parent, you may know what it is to bless, help, heal, give and give again, treating your children well, even if those children act in ways that are hurtful or hateful. We do not always deal with our children according to what they deserve. No doubt feeling let down by the disciples falling asleep, rather than praying with him in his hour of need, I do think that I can hear disappointment when he says to Peter, James and John, 1 hour. Was that too much to ask? But I do not hear any sense of resentment or retaliation. There are no cruel or cutting words. In Gethsemane, we see Jesus respond to both the casual carelessness of friends and the active aggression of enemies with grace. In the Gospels, Jesus is always raising the bar, not only when it comes to how his disciples should show grace to people, but also in who should be on the receiving end of that grace. Jesus taught, "If you love those who love you, what credit is it to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners expecting to be repaid in full, but love your enemies. Do good to them and lend to them without expecting anything back, and then your reward will be great, and you will be called children of the Most High, because he is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful." It is not uncommon for people to be good to those in our family or circle. But what Jesus is talking to his disciples about here, and at various points throughout the Gospels, is about creating a bigger circle. A circle that includes the poor, a circle that includes strangers, and hardest of all, a circle that includes our enemies. In the classic book, movie and musical Les Miserables, there is an illustration of this remarkable ability. In this story, Jean Valjean, just released from 19 years in prison, finds refuge in the home of the compassionate Bishop Myriel. That same evening, Valjean steals Myriel's silverware but is captured by the police. However, to protect the man who had just stolen from him, the bishop tells the police he had given the silverware to Valjean and encourages him to take 2 extra candlesticks as well. The tale goes on to portray the hefty impact this unwarranted and astounding kindness has on Valjean's life and outlook. In his book, Strength to Love, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. wrote this: "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Perhaps love is never more powerful than when it is undeserved."
Fullness, life with me. Listen to the words of the risen Christ.